My own dad beat me unconscious just because I said a few words to a guy on the porch. But the next morning, I served that soon-to-be incarcerated man his final meal. 3 minutes later, handcuffs clicked around his wrists and why Dad's name was Oscar Sanders. Everyone in town looked up to him. He ran a general store right on Main Street, selling everything from sugar, salt, and kerosene to cloth and farm tools. He was one of Medbrook's most prominent businessmen back in the day. Even now, people who remember him still say, "Oh, Oscar was a hard worker, always smiling in that store." If only they knew the truth, our house was right behind the store. A wooden structure with a tin roof that clattered like mad when it rained. It had 3 rooms, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove that never went out, my dad's bedroom, and a tiny little room for me. Between the house and the store was a dirt yard where my mom, Linda, kept chickens and tended a small garden, lettuce, radishes, and green onions. Poor Mom, she was such a quiet woman. Always with her head down, like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had long black hair pulled tightly into a bun and wore plain dark dresses every day. I remember sometimes, when she thought no one was listening, she'd hum softly, a sad song, something about, "Oh, how I missed the dawn of life." Now that I'm older, I realize she was singing through a heart full of pain. Every morning, I'd wake up to the knock of the store's first customers. Dad opened early, greeting everyone with that big smile. "Mornin', Mr. Wilson, how's the family?" "Mrs. Peterson, sure good to see you here." But the second he closed the door and stepped inside the house, he was a different man entirely. While he worked in the store during the day, I'd play in the yard with the corn husk doll Mom made me. We couldn't afford a store-bought doll, so she'd tie corn husks together with string and draw a little face with charcoal. I'd make up stories, build tiny houses out of stones, and play house with the chickens. Sometimes the neighbor kids would come over, and we'd hide behind the woodpile playing hide and seek, but even as a kid, I knew something was off. I noticed how Mom would go extra quiet when Dad was around, how she'd keep her head down whenever he spoke to her. Sometimes she'd have purple bruises on her arms, and she'd say she'd fallen or bumped into the closet door. Once, her right eye was swollen shut for 3 days. She said she'd tumbled down the stairs, but I knew we didn't even have stairs in our house. Everything changed at night, after the store closed. Dad loved drinking, always had. He'd lock himself in the kitchen, sipping whiskey he hid behind the grain sacks, muttering to himself. Sometimes I'd hear him cursing life, cursing Mom, cursing the whole world. Once that whiskey hit, even the tiniest thing would set him off. "Linda, this food's got no salt." "Linda, why ain't my shirt washed?" "Linda, tell that girl to shut up, she's driving me crazy." Mom would rush to wait on him, terrified, desperate to keep him happy. I'd hide in my little room under the patchwork quilt Mom sewed, listening to his yelling and her quiet apologies. Remember one winter night when I was about 7, they were fighting worse than usual. Dad was screaming that Mom was useless, good for nothing, that she'd starve to death if it weren't for him. I heard plates shattering, Mom crying and begging for forgiveness, even though she didn't know what she'd done wrong. Then everything went quiet, a silence worse than the fighting. The next day, Mom had a bandage on her arm, saying she'd cut herself washing dishes. But I saw the shards on the kitchen floor, they had blood on them. Way more than just a little cut. Kids at school would ask sometimes why Mom was always so quiet when she picked me up. Why she wore long sleeves even in summer, why she never smiled. I didn't know what to say, so I'd make up excuses. "She's shy. Doesn't talk much." But deep down, I knew something terrible was wrong in our house, something really bad. Around my 8th birthday, Mom started teaching me to cook. "Cindy, baby, you gotta learn this," she'd say, lifting me up onto a stool to stir the beans. "A woman who can cook will never go hungry." Now I realize she was preparing me to fend for myself. She knew she wouldn't be around much longer. The morning of my 8th birthday in 1955. I woke up to find Mom gone. Her room was empty, her dresser drawers open, some clothes missing. Dad said she left because she was no good, that she'd abandoned her own daughter, that she was shameful. But I found the letter she'd hidden under my pillow. Cindy, my darling girl, forgive me. Someday you'll understand. I love you more than anything in the world. That morning, I stared out at Medbrook's empty fields, not knowing my life had forever changed. At 8 years old, I became the only woman in Oscar Sanders' house. After Mom left, dear friends, life at home changed completely. I, an 8-year-old girl, became the lady of the house, and Dad wasted no time showing me the rules I had to follow. On his first lunch break after Mom left, he came home from the store to find no meal on the table. I'd been crying in my room, clutching Mom's letter, when I heard him roar from the kitchen, "Cindy, where's my lunch? You think just 'cause your no-good mom ran off, I gotta starve?" I rushed to the kitchen, my eyes swollen, sobbing uncontrollably. "Daddy, I don't really know how to cook yet," I started to say, but he slapped me hard across the face, knocking me to the floor. "I don't want to hear no excuses, I want food on this table. Starting today, you learn who's in charge here. You obey me, no questions asked." He pointed at me as I lay on the floor, holding my cheek. "Your mom spoiled you, but that's over. Now you're gonna be a real woman." That's how his training began. Every night when he closed the store, he'd inspect everything I'd done. The house had to be spotless, the clothes washed and ironed, dinner on the table promptly. If anything was even a little off, I'd pay for it. I remember one afternoon in 1956 when I was 9, I burned the rice. The kitchen reeked of charred grain, and he sniffed the air like an angry dog the second he walked in. "What's that smell?" he asked in that low, dangerous voice I'd learned to fear. "Daddy, the rice stuck to the bottom a little," I tried to explain. "I'll make more." But he'd already unbuckled his belt. "Come here," he said, sitting down on a chair and yanking my arm toward him. "Wastin' food is a sin, and sin's gotta be punished." The belt stung like fire as I cried and screamed, but he didn't stop. "Quit your blubbering, you gotta learn to be tough." Year after year, the rules got stricter. I couldn't go outside without his permission, couldn't talk to anyone on the street. If a neighbor tried to chat with me on the porch, I had to go inside immediately. "Women who stand around talkin' to men on the street are loose," he'd say. "My daughter ain't gonna be that way." By 1959, when I was 12, things got even worse. My body was starting to develop, and the way he looked at me scared me. He began commenting on my clothes, saying I was growing up, that I was getting interesting. I started wearing baggy clothes, hiding myself under Mom's old apron. One night when he was drunk, he said, "Cindy, you're turning into a pretty little thing." He sat in the kitchen, his eyes red from whiskey, a look that made me want to disappear. "I gotta keep you safe, all the men in this town are animals." That's when he started locking the front door from the inside at night. "It's to protect us," he said. But I knew it was to keep me from running away. During the day, while he was at the store, I could move around the house and yard, but I always felt like I was being watched. He'd come home unexpectedly, pretending he'd forgotten something, really just checking up on me to make sure I was where I was supposed to be. At school, I was a quiet girl with no real friends. I couldn't explain to the other kids why I had to rush home right after school, why I could never go to their houses or accept party invitations. Teachers would ask if everything was okay at home, and I'd force a smile and say fine. But there was one thing he could never control, my dreams. At night, I'd dream of Mom coming back to take me away, of us leaving Medbrook for somewhere far away. But I'd wake up heartbroken, knowing how far reality was from my dreams. In 1962, when I was 15, something happened that changed the course of my life forever. There was a boy in town named Eric, Mr. Thompson's son, whose dad owned the hardware store. He was a polite, good kid, always saying hello to me when we passed on the street. We'd never had anything more than a casual greeting, no real conversation, just basic manners. One Saturday afternoon, I was sweeping the yard when I heard someone call my name. It was Eric. He was walking by and stopped to ask if I knew where Mrs. Morrison lived. His dad needed to deliver some hinges to her. It's just around the corner, the blue house with the white picket fence, I said, pointing down the street. He thanked me and was about to keep walking when he asked, "Cindy, you gonna be at the church social next week?" It was just an innocent question, something a polite boy would ask a girl from town. But at that exact moment, Dad appeared in the back door of the store. He'd heard every word. "Cindy, get inside this house right now," he shouted in that tone that brooked no argument. Eric jumped at his harshness, quickly saying, "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Sanders. Good afternoon." Then he hurried away. My heart was pounding as I walked inside, knowing I was in for it. Dad closed the store early that day, coming home with a dark, furious look on his face. "Sit down," he said, pointing to a chair in the kitchen. "We need to have a talk." I sat, my hands trembling in my lap. He stood in front of me with his arms crossed, staring at me like I was a criminal. "What were you talking to that boy about?" he asked. "Daddy, he just wanted to know where Mrs. Morrison lives, nothing else," I said. "Nothing else?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Cindy, you're 15 years old, a young lady now. Standing on the porch talking to boys is a skin for trouble." "But Daddy, he just asked for directions," I protested. "Shut up." He slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes rattle. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You know damn well you ain't supposed to talk to no men. I didn't raise you to be a tramp." That night, for the first time in my life, he locked me in my room. I heard the key turn in the lock and knew everything had changed. This wasn't just strictness anymore, it was imprisonment. The next day was Sunday, and he wouldn't let me go to church. "A woman who gives men ideas don't deserve to set foot in God's house," he said. I was locked up all day, staring out at Medbrook's fields through my tiny window. Feeling like a prisoner in my own home. That's when it hit me. Dear friends, at 15 years old, my life was heading down a very dangerous path. That innocent conversation with Eric on the porch had wounded his twisted pride. I knew deep down things would only get worse before they got better. After that talk with Eric, my life turned into a storm. My already controlling father became a true jailer, and I, at 15, his prisoner. Once he'd locked me in my room that Sunday, the rules changed completely. He installed a bolt on the outside of my bedroom door, locking me in every night after dinner. "This way you'll learn not to give men the time of day," he said. As if that innocent conversation had been some unforgivable sin, mornings became a ritual of humiliation. He'd wake me up at 5, unlock the door, and shout, "Get up, Cindy. Lazy women are good for nothing." I'd rush to the kitchen, light the wood stove, make his coffee, and clean the entire house before he opened the store. If anything wasn't perfect, punishment followed. The sound of that key turning in the lock at night became the most terrifying sound of my life. I'd lie in my small bed, listening to his footsteps fade away, knowing I was completely alone in the world. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I'd hear him stumbling down the hallway after drinking, and my heart would race with fear. Remember one morning in the winter of 1963 when I was 16, I had the flu. I'd been coughing all night, and when he woke me up, I was running a fever and shivering uncontrollably. The bitter Medbrook wind was seeping through the window cracks, and I could barely stand. "Daddy, I think I'm sick," I whispered weakly, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me roughly, nearly making me fall. My shoulder throbbed with pain for days. "Sick? Quit your pretendin', you just don't want to work. Lazy women always have excuses." He dragged me to the kitchen and pushed me toward the cold stove. "Start the fire, quit your whinin'." I spent the whole day cooking with a high fever and chills, while he popped in from the store every now and then to check on me. I remember the smell of the wood stove mixed with the bitter taste of fever in my mouth. My hands were shaking so badly I spilled a pot of beans all over the kitchen floor. "Look at this mess you made," he shouted when he saw it. "Now get on your knees and pick 'em up, teach you to be careful." I knelt on the cold floor for an hour, picking up beans one by one with my feverish, trembling hands, while he stood and watched that night. Even though I was clearly very ill, he didn't call a doctor or get any medicine. He just said, "Obedient people don't get sick. This is God's punishment for a disobedient daughter." I lay in bed for a whole week, and he only brought me water and dry bread, saying good food was for people who deserved it. I was delirious with fever, calling for Mom, dreaming she'd come back for me. When I finally recovered, I was skin and bones, too weak to lift a bucket from the well, but the worst part wasn't the hunger or the physical abuse, dear friends. It was the way he looked at me. As I grew older and developed more, his gaze changed, became more and more unsettling. He started saying terrible things about my body, making me feel ashamed and terrified. "You look just like your mom," he'd say sometimes when he was drunk. "Same height, same walk, but you ain't gonna end up like her. You ain't gonna abandon me." The way he stared at me made me want to crawl into a hole. I started wearing even baggier clothes, wrapping myself up in big aprons to hide my body. I avoided the cracked mirror on the kitchen wall, turning my head whenever I passed it, afraid to look at myself. I wanted to disappear, vanish into thin air. One terrible night in 1963, he came home drunker than usual. He'd been drinking at the store after closing, stumbling through the door muttering to himself. The kitchen reeked of whiskey. I was washing the dinner dishes, my hands rough from cold water and soap, when I suddenly felt him standing behind me. "Cindy," he slurred, his voice thick with alcohol. "You know I'm the only man who'll ever take care of you, only me." A chill ran down my spine, and I tried to pull away, but he grabbed my arm. His hand was cold and rough, and when he leaned in, I smelled the harsh stench of whiskey on his breath. "Daddy, you're drunk, you should go rest," I said. "Don't tell me what to do," he shouted, squeezing my arm so hard the purple bruise lasted for weeks. "I'm your father, I own you. You gotta respect me." That night, he crossed a line that should never be crossed. I don't want to go into details, those memories still cut deep into my soul. But I can tell you this, after that night, my childhood was over for good. He stumbled out of my room, satisfied, leaving me lying in the dark, feeling like a part of me was broken forever. The old mattress was soaked with my silent tears as I stared at the ceiling all night, wondering how God could allow such a thing to happen. After that, my life became a silent hell. He treated me like his property, something that belonged only to him. He'd say, "By the time I'm done with you, no one else will want you. You'll always be my responsibility." And I started to believe those cruel words. I tried to ask for help a few times. Once, when he rarely let me go to church, I wanted to talk to Pastor Johnson. He'd known our family for years, a kind old man with white hair. But the words got stuck in my throat. How do you tell a man of God that your own father has done those things to you? How do you put into words something so dirty, so shameful? "Cindy, everything okay at home?" the pastor asked, noticing how nervous I was. I sat in the front pew, clutching the rosary Mom had left me tightly in my hands. "Fine, Pastor," I lied, looking down. I get lonely sometimes since Mom left." "Loneliness is part of life, child," he said. "God won't give you more than you can bear." He prayed for me briefly, then moved on to greet others. I walked out of the church feeling even heavier, like not even God could help me. Another time, I tried to talk to Mrs. Davis. She owned the dress shop in town and had always been kind to me. A plump, cheerful woman, she made the prettiest dresses in Medbrook. She asked why I was so thin and pale, and I tried to hint that things weren't right at home. "Oh, Cindy, it's just adolescence," she said, continuing to cut fabric for a navy dress without looking up. "A little moody, that's all, passes soon enough." People only wanted to see what they wanted to see, the respected businessman and his obedient daughter. No one could imagine what went on behind closed doors. I felt like I was shouting at the bottom of a deep well, but no one could hear me. Over time, I lost hope. I lived like a ghost, doing chores mechanically, eating very little, sleeping even less, always on edge. I was so thin my clothes hung off me, but he said I was getting more interesting, thin like a real woman. In my darkest moments, I stared at the kitchen knife, thoughts no 16-year-old should ever have crossing my mind. Sometimes when he was passed out drunk, I'd stand outside his bedroom door, imagining. But I always stopped myself. He was my dad. No matter how much of a monster he was, I was afraid of going to hell for doing something terrible in those darkest days. The only thing that kept me going was that sad song Mom used to hum, "Oh, how I missed the dawn of life." Now I understood why she'd sung it so sorrowfully. She'd been through the same hell, escaping to save her own life. Now it was my turn to save myself. Dear friends, that's how I lived for nearly 2 years, like a wounded animal hiding in a cave, only coming out when absolutely necessary. Until 1964, when I was 17, a voice inside me said, "Enough. Either find a way out, or die here." In that moment of utter despair, I began planning something I wasn't sure I had the courage to do. But sometimes, when life pushes you to the edge, you discover strength you never knew you had. It was an afternoon in March 1964, the last straw, as I call it. I'd just turned 17, having survived that silent hell for almost 2 years. That afternoon, I was hanging clothes out to dry in the yard when a boy walked by and said hello. It was Theodore, Mrs. Mitchell's son, who lived 3 blocks away. A polite boy, 2 years older than me, who worked on Mr. Jackson's farm and was on his way home from work. He was wearing dusty overalls, walking down the dirt road, and when he saw me in the yard, he said, "Good afternoon, Cindy." He took off his straw hat and nodded politely, a habit he'd learned at home. He stood on the other side of the wooden fence, keeping a respectful distance, not even stopping. "Good afternoon, Theodore," I replied, continuing to hang up my nightgown without looking up. It was an instinctive response, natural, something anyone with manners would do when greeted on the street. He kept walking home, and I kept working, never imagining those few polite words would turn into my worst nightmare, but someone had seen that innocent conversation. Mrs. Jenkins, Medbrook's biggest gossip, had been peeking out her kitchen window, which just happened to face our yard. That woman never missed a thing on our street. Who came into town, who left, who talked to whom, she'd run straight to tell my dad that night. Before the sun had fully set, Dad came home from the store, his face bright red with anger. He didn't even take off his leather apron from the store or wash his hands like he usually did. He stormed into the house like a hurricane. "Cindy!" he shouted before he even closed the door, his voice echoing through the small house, scaring the chickens in the yard. "Get over here right now." The iron pot I'd been washing slipped from my hands into the basin with a dull thud. I rushed to the living room, my heart pounding, my hands still wet with soapy water. I knew that tone all too well. It was the same one he used right before he hit me hard. "Mrs. Jenkins told me something interesting today," he said, slowly unbuckling his belt, the way he always did when he wanted to scare me. The sound of the metal buckle hitting the wooden table made my blood run cold. "Said she saw you talking to Theodore on the porch. Is that true?" "Daddy, he just said hello to me on the street." "I wasn't on the porch, I was hanging clothes," I explained. "Shut up." He rushed toward me, his fists clenched. "How many times have I told you? Decent women don't stand around talking to men on the street. Do I need to say it again?" "But Daddy, it was just a polite greeting." He didn't even stop walking, I pleaded. The first strike of the belt came out of nowhere, hitting my back and knocking me to the wooden floor of the living room. The pain was so intense I couldn't breathe, couldn't even scream. I tasted blood in my mouth. I'd bitten my tongue when I fell. "Get up," he shouted angrily. "I ain't done with you yet." I struggled to my feet, trying to hold back tears, but they streamed down my face anyway. That was just the beginning. That night, all the devils inside him seemed to wake up. He hit me with his belt, with his hands, with his fists, shouting words that hurt more than any blow. "You're just a tramp, just like your mom," he roared. Between beatings, I saw the spit flying from his mouth, his eyes bloodshot, the veins bulging in his neck. Flirting with men in town, giving M ideas. But I'll teach you to be a decent woman, even if I have to beat it into you. I tried to cover my head with my arms, but he pulled them away and kept hitting. I felt the belt buckle slice my forehead, hot blood streaming into my eyes, blurring my vision, but the worst part wasn't the beating itself. It was what he said after he'd tired himself out, standing over me like a wild animal as I lay on the floor. He was sweating profusely, his hair messy, breathing hard as if he'd run a mile. Now you know who's boss around here. Tonight you'll learn what it means to obey your daddy in everything. When he said everything, dear friends, the twisted look in his eyes, the way he licked his lips like a hungry beast, I knew right then this would be the most terrifying night of my life. He grabbed me by the hair and dragged me to my room, like I was a sack of potatoes. I heard the key turn in the lock, then his heavy footsteps walking down the creaky wooden floor. I lay in the dark, my whole body throbbing with pain, knowing he'd be back, and when he came, it would be worse than anything I'd ever endured. I couldn't even lie on the bed, my back hurt so badly, so I lay on the cold floor of my room. For the first time in my life, I seriously thought about ending it all. There was a small, high window in the room facing the backyard. If I could climb on a chair and tie a rope to the windowsill. But no, that was cowardly. And I was afraid of hell, afraid I'd meet him there too. Just then, I heard the sound of a whiskey bottle clinking against the wooden table in the kitchen. I knew that sound all too well, it was the bottle he hid behind the grain sacks. He was drinking again. The more he drank, the worse things would get. I lay in my room for hours, listening to him muttering, cursing, throwing things. Plates crashing against the wall, chairs scraping across the floor, drawers being slammed open. Every now and then, he'd walk to my bedroom door and just stand there, saying nothing. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other side of the wooden door, could feel him leaning against it. I held my breath, squeezed my eyes shut, pretending to be asleep, praying he'd go away. But he was like a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. To be why midnight, even the crickets had stopped chirping, and he came back. I heard the key turn in the lock, and I knew the moment had finally come. My entire body began to shake uncontrollably. I don't want to describe what happened in the early hours of that morning, those wounds still bleed in my soul. But I can tell you this, when the sun rose the next day, painting the Medbrook sky pink and orange, I was no longer the same girl who'd been hanging clothes in the yard the afternoon before. He left me lying on the floor of my room, moaning in pain, bleeding, then walked away like nothing had happened. Now you'll behave, were his final words, straightening his pants and running a hand through his messy hair. Tomorrow you'll be a decent woman. I lay on that cold wooden floor, my body broken, my spirit shattered. I could feel my blood sticking to my clothes, the taste of salt from my tears and metal from the blood in my mouth. And in that moment, dear friends, something inside me died, and something else was born. The scared little girl died that early morning, replaced by a woman who knew she had to fight to survive. My mind was strangely clear, as if it had separated itself from the pain of my body, working on its own. If I stayed here, he'd kill me. Not right away, but slowly, like he'd been doing all these years. Worse and worse, day by day, until I couldn't take it anymore and died of sorrow, pain, and hopelessness. I tried to stand, but the pain was too much, and everything went black. When I woke up, the sun was high in the sky, and I heard him greeting customers in the store like a normal person. "Good morning, Mr. Williams, how's the farm?" "Mrs. Cooper, sure good to see you here." As if just hours earlier, he'd nearly beaten his own daughter to death. I crawled to the basin in my room and tried to clean myself up. The cold water stung my wounds, but I had to get clean. I looked at my trembling reflection in the water and didn't recognize the girl staring back. I was as pale as a corpse, my eyes swollen from crying, my lips split, purple fingerprint-shaped bruises on my neck and arms, ***, that's when I had a vision, dear friends. I don't know if it was a dream, a hallucination from the pain, or if Mom was really there in that moment, but I swear, I heard her voice as clearly as I did when I was a child, soft and gentle. "Cindy, my daughter, it's time to be brave. Don't let him destroy you the way he almost destroyed me. You have strength you never imagined. You're my daughter, and my daughter doesn't give up. I remembered the words from her letter, someday, you'll understand. Now I understood. She hadn't abandoned me. She'd tried to save me in the only way she knew how, by running away before he killed her too. Now it was my turn to save myself, and in that moment, lying on the cold floor of my prison cell, I did something I'd never done in my life, planned. Not an escape, because I had nowhere to go and no money, but a way to end this once and for all. I remembered there was a piece of paper in the kitchen drawer with the Medbrook Police Department's phone number. The sheriff's name was Walter, a serious, respected man in town, known for not being afraid to stand up to powerful people. But how could I convince him I wasn't lying? Who would believe that the respected businessman Oscar Sanders, the man everyone in town thought was hardworking and kind, was capable of doing those terrible things to his own daughter? Then an idea hit me. A simple yet risky idea that made my head spin. If words weren't enough, I'd show them proof. I'd let them see the scars on my body. But I had to do it in a way he couldn't deny, couldn't make excuses for, couldn't convince the authorities I was lying. I began to form a plan, one that involved food, a phone call, and a whole lot of courage. Because I knew if the plan failed, he'd really kill me. But if it succeeded, it would be Oscar Sanders' last meal as a free man. The next morning, when the first rays of sunlight streamed through the small window of my room, I was no longer the Cindy I'd been the day before. I lay on the cold floor, aching all over, but filled with a determination I'd never felt before. It was as if all the tears I'd cried over the years had washed away the fear in my soul. I heard him snoring in his room, still drunk from the night before, and knew I had a few hours to put my plan into action. I slowly stood up, every movement agony, and looked at the small mirror hanging on the wall. My face was swollen, there was a cut on my forehead, my lip was split, and purple fingerprint bruises covered my neck. Perfect, these were the evidence I needed. I put on a long-sleeved shirt to cover the bruises on my arms, then pulled on one of Mom's old wool coats over it. I needed to look like my usual self on the street, but be ready to show everything when the time came. I waited for him to wake up and go to the store as usual. When I heard the front door slam shut, I rushed to the kitchen drawer and grabbed the piece of paper with the police department's phone number. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd faint, but I held on. I couldn't back down now. It was the first time in months I'd left the house without his permission. The March morning was cool, with that familiar Medbrook wind carrying the scent of fields and livestock. I walked down the dirt road, trying to act casual, but every step hurt. Every movement a reminder of the night before, when I got to town. I went straight to Mrs. Porter's house. She was the telephone operator and had one of the few public phones in Medbrook. A kind woman in her 50s, she'd always been gentle with me. "Good morning, Mrs. Porter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Could you help me make a very important phone call?" She looked at me strangely, noticing the bruises on my face, but didn't ask any questions. "Of course, dear. Who are you calling?" "The police, it's an emergency." The phone rang twice before someone answered. "Medbrook Police Department, Deputy Roberts speaking." "Please, I need to speak to Sheriff Walter, it's urgent," I said, my voice trembling. "Hold on." Those minutes felt like an eternity before he picked up. "Sheriff Walter here." "Who's this?" I took a deep breath and said the words I'd rehearsed 100 times. "Sheriff, this is Cindy, Oscar Sanders' daughter. I really need your help. Please come to my house at exactly noon today. I'll have the evidence of a crime laid out on the table." There was silence on the other end. "Ma'am, what are you talking about? What crime?" "I can't explain over the phone, Sheriff, but please, you have to come. Bring 2 deputies, and be there right on time. I'll prove everything I need to prove." "Cindy, are you serious about this?" "More serious than anything in my life, Sheriff." "Noon exactly, and please don't tell anyone I called." I hung up the phone, my hands still shaking. Mrs. Porter looked at me with concern, but I thanked her and hurried out. I couldn't explain anything to anyone yet. Next, I went to Mr. Johnson's grocery store and bought the ingredients for Dad's favorite meal, beef and potatoes. I used the change he always kept in the drawer for emergencies. This is a real emergency, I thought, almost smiling. Cindy, cooking up a special lunch today? Mr. Johnson asked as he wrapped the meat. It's a lunch he'll never forget, I replied, not lying. I carried the groceries home, keeping an eye on the time. It was 9:30 a.m. I had 2.5 hours to get everything ready. The stew needed to simmer slowly to get tender, just the way he liked it. I went in through the back door and got to work. Following Mom's recipe, I seasoned the meat with garlic, salt, black pepper, and cumin, put it in an iron pot with some water, and let it cook on low heat. The smell filled the house quickly. Around 11 a.m., he wandered into the kitchen, drawn by the aroma. He still had a hangover, his face swollen and eyes red, but he smiled in satisfaction when he smelled the food. What's that smell?" he asked, walking over to me. I instinctively stepped back, but he took it as obedience. "Beef and potatoes, Daddy, your favorite," I said, stirring the pot and keeping my head down. He stood there watching me, that disgusting tone in his voice. "Looks like yesterday's lesson sunk in. You're finally learning your place." I pushed down the revulsion and forced a smile. "Yes, Daddy, you're right." He smiled, satisfied, and went back to the store. "Call me when it's ready, I'm starvin'. As soon as he was gone, I ran to the yard and threw up behind the fence. I couldn't stand pretending, but I had to hold on just a little longer, just a little. At 11:40 a.m., I laid a clean tablecloth on the kitchen table and set out the plates and silverware. I served the stew in a nice dish, the potatoes in a big bowl, and made a small salad with tomatoes and onions. I wanted everything to be perfect. 5 minutes before noon, I called him in for lunch. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked in with that arrogant, superior attitude I hated so much. "Well, look at this table all set nice," he said, sitting down in his usual spot at the head of the table. "That lesson sure did you good, huh?" "Yes, Daddy," I lied, serving him a heaping plate of food. He dug in greedily, moaning in pleasure with every bite. This is good, Cindy, just the way I like it." Obedient and attentive. He picked up a big piece of meat with his hands and started gnawing on the bone, making that disgusting slurping sound. I stood beside the table, not eating, just watching him. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I stared at the clock on the wall, counting the seconds. Noon. 12:02 p.m. "Sit down and eat," he said with his mouth full. "You gotta keep your strength up to take care of me." 12:03 p.m. Where were they? Just then, I heard a knock on the door, loud, firm, authoritative. Dad stopped chewing and frowned. "Who the hell is that?" "I'm eatin'. "I'll get it," I said, my legs shaking as I walked to the door. I opened it, and there they were, Sheriff Walter, a tall, serious man with a gray mustache, and 2 uniformed deputies. In that moment, the truth was about to come out. "Good afternoon, Cindy," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "We're here in response to your call." I heard a chair scrape behind me as Dad stood up, furious. "What's going on here?" "What call?" "Walter, what are you doing in my house?" "Oscar, we have a serious complaint to investigate," the sheriff said, stepping inside with the deputies. "Complaint? What complaint? Who's got the nerve to lie about me?" Dad's face turned bright red as he tried to wipe the grease from his hands on his shirt, when I did the bravest thing I'd ever done in my life. Without saying a word, I took off my wool coat, then my shirt, leaving only a thin undershirt. I revealed my chest, shoulders, and arms to the room. There was complete silence. My body was covered in purple bruises, cuts, fingerprint marks on my neck, and belt buckle scars on my back and arms. The evidence was right there, etched into my skin like a terrible map, impossible to deny. Sheriff Walter's face turned pale, and the deputies stared at each other in shock. As for my dad, He looked like he'd seen the end of the world. "My God," the sheriff whispered. "Oscar Sanders, you're under arrest." "It's a lie. She fell. She did this to herself," Dad shouted, desperate. "Fingerprint bruises on your neck don't come from Fallon, Oscar," the sheriff said, pulling out his handcuffs. "And neither do belt buckle scars on your back." In that moment, Dad realized he'd walked right into a trap. He looked at me with hatred and despair. You betrayed me." "I saved myself," I replied, putting my coat back on. "And I saved every other girl you might have hurt." As the deputies cuffed him, he shouted and screamed, kicking and fighting. I stood in the living room, staring at the leftover lunch on the table. The stew was getting cold, the grease congealing on the plate. It really was Oscar Sanders' last meal as a free man. And for me, it was the first taste of freedom, dear friends. I'm 78 years old now, and I still live in Medbrook, the town I was born in. The town where I endured so much suffering, but also where I learned to be strong. After Dad's arrest that March day in 1964, my life took a completely different path. Sheriff Walter helped me find a place to stay. Mrs. Williams, a widow who ran a boarding house near the church, took me in like I was her own daughter. I worked for her for 3 years, cooking and cleaning, learning to be around kind people who respected and cared for me. That's where I met Harold, my late husband, may he rest in peace. He was a ranch hand from a nearby farm who stayed at the boarding house on weekends. A quiet, gentle man, he never raised his voice at me, never laid a hand on me. At first, I was scared any sudden movement would make me jump. But he had the patience of a saint, slowly winning my heart with respect and genuine affection. In 1967, when I was 20, we got married. He built this little house for me with his own hands on a quiet street in Medbrook, and I planted a garden and kept chickens in the yard. We had 3 children, Oliver, Vanessa, and Jacob. Each pregnancy was a blessing, and each child's birth was proof that I'd successfully rebuilt my life. Harold was a carpenter all his life, and the wooden table I cook on every day was made with his rough, loving hands. "Cindy," he used to say, "this table will be the heart of our family. We'll raise our kids here, entertain friends, and one day welcome our grandchildren." He was right. Harold passed away 10 years ago from a heart attack, but he left me with a loving family and this house filled with love. Today, all 3 of my children live close by in Medbrook. Oliver runs an auto repair shop, Vanessa teaches at the town elementary school, and Jacob works at a farm supply store. They're all married, and they've given me 5 wonderful grandchildren. They're the joy of my life. Brittany, 15, is hardworking and wants to be a nurse. Michael, 12, is mischievous but kind-hearted. Little Sophie, 8, loves helping me in the kitchen. And the 6-year-old twins, James and John, their visits turn the house into a celebration. Every Sunday, they all come over for lunch. It's a tradition we started when the first grandchild was born, and we've never missed a week. I get up around 5 a.m. to start cooking baked beans, stew, mashed potatoes, potato salad, and homemade bread. The smell fills the house. When they burst through the door, shouting, "Grandma Cindy! Grandma Cindy, it smells amazing!" and run to the kitchen to hug and kiss me, my heart melts. Sophie always asks, "Grandma, can I help?" I let her stir the beans and season the salad, and we chat about school, her friends, and her dreams. After lunch, we sit in the yard drinking coffee, and they ask me to tell stories. But I don't tell the sad ones. I tell them about playing in the fields as a child, about the old harvest festivals, about how I met Grandpa Harold. Warm, happy stories, not the ones that hurt. My yard now is like a little piece of paradise. I grow lettuce, radishes, green onions, parsley, and cherry tomatoes, and keep chickens that lay fresh eggs every day. I also have a grapevine that produces sweet grapes in the summer. The apple tree Harold planted all those years ago still bears delicious fruit every fall. On quiet afternoons, I love sitting on the porch doing needlework, knitting sweaters, embroidering tablecloths, sewing little clothes for my grandchildren. Neighbors stop by sometimes for coffee and a chat. Life is simple, but full of peace. Every now and then, when I'm sitting alone looking at this wooden table I use every day, I think about the table at Dad's house, all the fear I felt there. I thank God for giving me the strength to escape that life and build what I have now. I don't hold any resentment, and I don't dwell on the past. Let the past stay in the past. What matters is the present, this wonderful family I've built, the love I've received, and the love I can give. I'm most proud of watching my children raise their own kids with love and respect. In this family, I've never seen anyone raise a hand in anger, never heard a shout of rage. My grandchildren are growing up surrounded by love and protection, knowing they have a grandma who would do anything for them. At night, when I lie in this bed I've slept in for over 50 years and look at Harold's picture on the wall, I thank him for building all this with me. For the children we raised, for the grandchildren who've come into our lives. For being able to turn pain into love and fear into courage. To my children who might be watching this, if you've made it this far, God wanted you to hear my story. If any of you are going through what I went through, I want you to know, you are not alone. More importantly, you can get out. I once thought living in hell was normal, that I deserved it, that things would never change. For years, I thought it was my fault, that I'd made him angry, that I was a bad daughter. But that's not true. If you're going through this now, it's not your fault either. I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified. When I called the police that morning, I was scared to death, but I did it anyway because I knew if I didn't, I'd die there eventually. Day by day, I've come to understand that sometimes you have to be smarter than the evil around you. Words aren't enough, you need proof. Crying isn't enough, you need to take action. When you act with wisdom and courage, God will open doors for you. I've discovered that the best revenge against someone who's hurt you is to live a good life. Now, watching my grandchildren play in the yard, smelling the food cooking in the kitchen, sleeping soundly at night, I know I've won. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with love, loving myself first, then others. I've learned that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's freeing yourself. I didn't forgive him for his sake, I forgave him for mine, to find true freedom. If you know someone who's suffering from domestic violence, don't look the other way. Sometimes a kind word, a listening ear, or a shoulder to lean on can give that person the courage to keep going. If you're the one being hurt, please ask for help. No matter what town or country you're in, there are kind people willing to lend a hand. Go to the authorities, to shelters, to support groups. Human dignity is universal, no matter where you are. Remember, no one has the right to hurt you, even family. No one has the right to use you, humiliate you, or make you feel less than worthy. You deserve respect, you deserve love, and you deserve a peaceful life. The end of my story. I hope it plants a seed of hope in anyone who needs it. Now, dear friends, I need your help. If this story touched you, if you believe it can help someone going through something similar, please subscribe to the Reddit Story channel right now and turn on notifications. It's important that these stories of overcoming adversity reach the people who need them most. If you've watched until the end, please leave only one word in the comments: courage. That way, I'll know my message got through. Share this video with anyone you think needs to hear that it's never too late to start over. Let's speak up for those who haven't found their voice yet. Do it now, don't wait. One share from you could change someone's life.